It's a privilege to introduce Sir Martin Sorrell. In 1985, Martin founded WPP and built it into what it is today. The largest advertising and marketing services company in the world. And when you look at the numbers, they're simply staggering. We have nearly 190,000 employees, 112 markets, and 3,000 offices around the world. In 2014, we had billings of nearly 76 billion and revenues of nearly 20 billion. It's not often you get to introduce someone who was knighted in 2010, was awarded the Time 100 Titans and Builders, the most influential person in business, and one of the top CEOs in the world, most recently named by Harvard. In 2007, Martin took a big bet on 24/7, and that was the foundation of what Xaxis is today. He's constantly thinking about how to bring advantage to our clients. He's constantly preaching data and horizontality, and there's no better person to bring up to speak to probably the biggest frontier yet to conquer, which is addressability with broadcast. So please welcome Sir Martin Sorrell.
Thank you for this. Now, I've got four panelists. So maybe, can the panel join me? Where are my panel? Come on, my panel. Come and sit down. Tony said, what are you going to do? I said, going to be rude to a group of people on the panel. Right, now we have four panelists. Where's Eric? Eric, very brave. Not only are you brave enough to come on this panel, but you're brave enough to sit next to me. So Eric is a senior vice president product leadership at Nielsen. You've been at Nielsen, what, for 18 years?
No.
How long?
Just about 6 years.
6 years. And what did you do before Nielsen for 6 years?
We don't have time for all of that.
Come on, tell us.
I was at A&E Television for a few years. I was at Major League Baseball, Yahoo, number of different places.
No, Yahoo Hot Jobs, right?
Correct.
Right, well, at least I got that right, not the 18 years.
Very good.
Fine, good. So we're going to come on and talk a little bit about Nielsen. Scott, right, from Videology, chairman and CEO of Videology, and advertising.com before that.
Yes, sir.
Which you sold to AOL.
Yes, sir.
What do you think about Verizon and AOL?
Wonderful opportunity for their company.
Have you noticed any differences so far?
Not personally.
It's too early. And what do you think they should be doing? I'm not going to let you off the hook here on this, Scott. Come on, keep going.
Well, if I was working for them and I had that asset base with 130 million subscribers,
right,
I would probably walk into the virtual MVPD space using my 4G network to enable and power the pay TV opportunity against all the opportunities out there.
So you think it was a good idea?
Not sure yet what will happen, but that's what I would do if I had that asset base.
So which brings me back. What is Rentrack and Comscore a good idea?
You probably, didn't you want to ask that before?
No.
No. Sure.
Yeah?
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good because it'll make Nielsen even more aggressive, or create a better mousetrap, or what?
That's one way. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Thanks.
I mean, certainly bringing Comscore's digital assets together with Rentrack's TV
Okay,
data
good. So we
makes
can tick the
all
box
sense in
on
the world.
Rentrack and Comscore. Thank God for that. Okay,
Well
Michael. Right. Michael Bologna from Modi Media, a Group M veteran.
Yes, indeed.
How many years? 16?
17.
17 years. How's it been for you?
Wonderful. I'm still here.
No complaints?
Not one.
No plans to go anywhere else?
Not at all.
Very good. Okay. So maybe after this session there will be. And lastly, Jeremy from Turner Broadcasting.
Yes.
Now you are a lifer at Turner, aren't you?
No, I was actually at AOL prior to that.
And what do you think
Oracle,
about the
before that.
AOL deal?
Oh, I think it was a good deal. I mean, for Verizon, it makes a lot of sense. It extends what they can do on their wireless network pretty significantly, based,
Right.
based on what Scott was talking about.
Okay, very good. Now, so a big thank you, firstly, for agreeing to do this with us. And we are going to talk about addressable. Is broadcast really addressable? Is the heading. And we've got so I think the first thing we want to try and do is set some parameters for the discussion. The term addressable is almost as confusing as the term programmatic. And most would say programmatic is the application of data and automation to linear TV buying, whereas addressable takes those same capabilities to the individual household level. Now, the first question, we can start with Nielsen here at the end here. Do you agree with that? Or do you think addressability is something much broader than that?
Conceptually, I think it maybe is a bit broader. It's really the ability to find a specific audience as defined in some way, right? On digital, it's by segment, it's by behavior or any number of different characteristics, and that's all fairly well available. On television, and when you, particularly broadcast television or through a set-top box, it's typically more at the zip code household level. But notionally, it's the idea of reaching just that target segment and not theoretically having any waste in the delivery.
Okay. Scott, do you want to add to that?
I think there are different levels of addressability. So you have television unit level addressability, DMA and zone level addressability. We have household level addressability. We then have device level addressability, and then arguably you have individual, true, as we were talking from the earlier panel, identity level addressability. And I think the definition of addressability just follows into that different kind of distinctions.
Okay. Michael?
Yeah, I agree. There are different levels of addressability, but at the end of the day, what everybody is talking about today, right now, is household level addressable television, which means inserting a commercial to the individual set-top box based on who's living in that household and watching that television and measuring it back to sales. And 1/3 of every televisions right now has the actual ability to do that. So I think the definition's pretty spot on.
And Turner's view?
I guess I'd cast it slightly differently. I mean, as you get down on broadband and you're talking about the set of capabilities there, as well as on the other platforms, you have to look at whether you're talking about a simulcast network or you're talking about on-demand viewing, because the capabilities are different depending on which one of those forms of consumption you're using. As obviously on broadband, you have the greatest ability in terms of use cases to do all the forms of addressability. As you move up to like set-top box VOD, for example, the capabilities become more limited in terms of being able to serve a different ad to a different household. You can do some of those things as it relates to on-demand viewing, but as it relates to simulcast viewing, you're really talking about local avail infrastructure.
Right.
And as you move to just simulcast viewing and you talk about addressability, it's still, at least for national advertisers, one ad to every household. The technical capabilities to dynamically insert or really target don't really exist yet. So what you're talking about is putting an ad, the same ad, on all television sets, but addressing a particular audience segment that you figured out. You know, there's a propensity for car buyers in this show or that show.
Okay.
But that's still addressable. If you identify of those 42 million households, which of those are in the market to buy a luxury car, insert the ad there, and then tell the advertiser how many cars they sold from the campaign, isn't that addressable?
Keep going, Michael. Come on,
I would say-
spice it up.
So that's what we're talking about here, right? I mean, nothing's perfect. There are limitations, but in 1/3 of the U.S., we can tell an automotive advertiser how many cars they sold from the addressable campaign. Sure, it's the local avail. Sure, it's not the national networks yet. Absolutely, it's controlled by the MSOs. But yes, they're the ones that invested the tools and the technology, have the subscriber files, and gone through the privacy laws. But every single addressable advertising campaign that we've executed, and there's been hundreds, at almost 80% of them, we've tied it back to a sale. The spot aired, you sold soup. The spot aired, you sold a car. The spot aired, you became a customer. And, you know, in an old school television environment, that's a really, really big improvement. Long way to go, but it's a big step.
So there, Jeremy.
Well, what I would say back is you've got roughly 35 to 40% of the United States on satellite and not on cable, and there are no local avails. So you can't do that for a pretty sizable addressable market associated with it. And the second piece is that it's still the same ad to all audiences, right? At least for national advertising, which is the majority of the advertising that's there. So, you know, local avails are 2 to 3 minutes per hour, and that's, you know, the form of addressability that you're going to have. The data science that underlies a lot of that is a whole other conversation, but just in terms of the actual technical capabilities that exist vis-a-vis the MVPDs and the cable operators, that's kind of what you have today.
It's probably also worth mentioning that about 11% of households in the U.S. are broadcast only. So there is no ability to address those folks locally or nationally.
Anything you want to add on?
I'm a little surprised because, as you understand, there's these things called affiliates in the United States, at least, and the affiliates each have their own ability to sell their own advertising. So if there's a national program broadcast on, let's just say, NBCU, a client of the firm's, theoretically, different Sinclair can sell something different than could Belo or someone else or the owned and operated of NBCU itself. So there's addressability. It's just, once again, the level of addressability that I think is at stake here, not necessarily is it addressable or not.
Okay. So I want to move on now to a subject of challenges to addressability. So if we define it as the ability to deliver a specific ad to a specific household based on the characteristics of that household. And listening to you talk, and then Michael says, you know, we've done a lot of it already. How far along are we in the US in achieving scalable delivery? What are the hurdles that we still have to overcome? Are they technology hurdles or are they business model hurdles? For instance, is it still too risky for broadcasters to offer up their inventory in this way? So maybe we'll start, Jeremy.
So I think there are a number of hurdles, obviously, as it relates to broadcast television, the ability to have different ads to different households. If you think of, I'll give you one example. So if you think of broadband, for example, the majority of the advertising is either first-party hosted, you know, by the underlying programmer, or it's third-party hosted at the agency. And the ad calls can come in associated with that and insert the ad based on a particular audience segment or an underlying data management platform. As it relates to broadcast television, the ads are still hosted at the programmer, right, as it relates to national ads. So the ability to then insert different ads to different people is more challenging, and that's why you have in the prior panel the conversation about deterministic versus kind of causal relationships between the audience segment that you're hitting. That's going to change over time. So there's a couple really important things happening, and I'm a CTO, so I'm not a sales guy, so I live in the weeds. But the things that are happening from a technology standpoint that really change this are things like DOCSIS 3.1, which if folks saw the announcement from Comcast about rolling that out across their entire footprint by the end of 2018, what you're talking about is the acceleration of IP-based video on broadcast. That opens up a whole new world as it relates to how you insert advertising and start serving ads, national ads, but segmenting them by audience member and having different ads by household.
Okay. Do you want to?
I think it's a combination, technology, business model, and then one could argue, you know, how much does someone make? So the technology issue is we have to get that capability to address into the infrastructure. We have set-top boxes that have been around for a while, and there's a natural evolution of that. Not everything is over the top or fully IP, and it will take time, and it costs billions, if not tens of billions, to do it. Point one. Point two, economics. Who's going to pay for that? Right now, the last I looked, the typical MVPD or MSO and digital satellite makes, I think, advertising is the 5th profit item for them out of, meaning there's 4 other things above it. So there's a lot of other things they'd like to do. And then the other comment is if I'm a local MVPD ad salesperson and I have the ability to offer addressability, would I want to give that to the broadcast community? It gives them an advantage, arguably speaking, meaning those 2 minutes that I have as a seller of Comcast Spotlight gives me an advantage over the fact that the national broadcaster won't have that addressable opportunity.
Right.
So I think there's a fundamental challenge there. And I think the third is now I'm an inventory owner. How much do I want to make or put up of my inventory into full addressability? From our analysis, what we found is that once again, it's a broad statement, but if you put about 1/3 of your content up for content sales, 1/3 of your content up for, let's call it demographic selling, and 1/3 for the kind of fully addressable type of behavioral targeting that Michael is doing, that would probably maximize the yield overall. And the simple reason is that in order to get me, Scott Ferber, at the age of 12 to consider Coke versus Pepsi, I have to go do some broad marketing. So there is a desire to have not just everything be fully addressable, and the opportunity to aspire me, as Erwin will often say, to buy a Mercedes means I don't just need to target in-market automotive buyers. I actually need to reach those people at a time before they are capable of buying it to get aspiration. So I think it's a combination of those three things that are actually holding us back to a certain degree and not making it fully available yet.
Okay, Michael's straining at the leash. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, well, there's challenges with everything, right? Including television. We ask 50,000 people what they watch and assume the other 100 million watch the same. Like, that's a challenge. Every time we debate addressability, it goes back to the national avail, the local avail. Does the consumer actually know the difference? Don't think so. But at the end of the day, what Scott said, I believe 100%, and it comes down to yield. When addressability, in order for addressability, broadcasters to become national, that's going to require a carriage of discussion between the media owner, the TV network, and the operator, those that have deployed the technology in the boxes. In order for that to happen, it has to be economically responsible for everyone. And to do that, we have to get the calculators out and do the math. You know, everyone has, the buyer and the seller has to agree that, well, an average price for adults 18 to 49 may be $40. That doesn't mean that a portion of that audience isn't worth $180, a portion of it $30, and a portion of it none. And if we do that, and if we agree on it, then the economics will be there for the broadcaster, the operator, and the advertiser all to win. The second piece I would add to that is even if 100% of television homes were addressable, I don't believe more than 20 to 25% of an advertiser's budget would ever be addressable, because if all you're doing is addressing your customers or your competitors, you're missing the entire top of the funnel. In a perfect world, when we get past these technical limitations, and we will, addressability, in my opinion, will be used to manage frequency between the broad targeting that we do at the top of the funnel, right? What Scott just said, if you wait till someone's 40 years old to introduce them to a Mercedes, you missed the boat, down to the person whose lease is up on their BMW in the next 3 months. But
Jeremy is nodding vigorously.
I agree with much of what the gentleman have said. I think the one counter I would make is we're sort of focusing on the video business and the broadcast video business. The dynamics of the last mile, though, have another component, which is the broadband business. And so the changes that are occurring in the last mile infrastructure of the cable operators is as much or more driven by what's happening on broadband than what's happening in the video business. So the cable operators are already incented to make these changes and make these investments, and that's why you've seen a number of these announcements. The video business will ultimately be the beneficiary of these things. So I really anticipate that now, particularly now that some of these standards have been identified through Cable Labs and various standards bodies, that will accelerate. The other piece speaking on the programmer side and the other technology components of what we do is the changes that it drives in the inventory management systems and the trafficking systems of the programmers. It's very, very significant. You can do a lot of this stuff outside of those inventory management systems as long as you don't allocate too much inventory to it. But increasingly, as you get into 5, 10, 15, 20% of your inventory going addressable, yield, to the point, becomes incredibly important, and the trafficking systems and inventory management systems across the industry are going to have to catch up.
Okay, brilliant. Eric, just
Yeah, I agree with much of what was said here. First of all, I think programmatic is somewhat of an inevitability. It's coming. It's going to happen, and it's a good thing. Just in terms of why it may take longer than we would like, I think the theme across what was just said here is complexity. There's a lot of challenges to overcome. It's not one thing. It's dozens of things. It's the business model. It's the just making, and it's inertia. You know, the way that television is sold today is a very well-worn path. And making a change to that, particularly at the national broadcast level, it just requires a lot of effort.
And that's really important. If you think about it right now, if everything were addressable, maybe 5% of advertisers would be ready. I mean, advertisers are used to buying television, trading television, on broad demography. Getting them to think about adults 18 to 49 down to people that have purchased a particular product or a particular age or income, that's a big shift, and there's a lot of math that has to go through to determine, are the premiums worth affording the waste?
And there's still a little bit of bifurcation between TV and digital, right?
Absolutely.
So I think folks would like to think that TV can work and act like digital does today, the way that can be targeted and addressed. It just doesn't yet, so
all right,
it's
very
difficult.
good. Benefits and perils of addressability. Let's move on to another area. Is there a value in the mass reach that TV once provided? We'll start at this end of the panel, and still does to some degree. Will we still be able to find these mass reach opportunities in an addressable world? As household level of addressability becomes more of a reality, should this be the end goal for every one of our clients, advertiser? Is it possible that this degree of targeting doesn't make sense for some, either based on economics or even based on too narrow definition of their customer base? That, for example, what about aspirational advertising? What about life stage transitions and things like that? And for those using addressable TV already, what outcomes are they seeing? Let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think Michael talked about this a lot. This is, to me, a lot about aligning the goals of the campaign with the medium that you choose to use to advertise. TV remains probably the best canvas for those awareness-type campaigns that drive top-of-funnel activity, and will probably continue to do so for a long time. When you start moving down the funnel and you start having smaller and smaller audiences that are more defined, and you're starting to move away from brand advertising toward direct response, yeah, sure, you want to be able to address those audiences directly and only put your advertisement in front of those audiences. And by the way, be willing to pay a higher CPM because you're reaching that very specific audience.
So 2 years ago tomorrow, Group M and WPP launched a unit specifically 100% focused on addressable television. We've written over 400 addressable television plans, and I'll be honest with you, a third of those, the recommendation back to the advertiser is addressability is not right for you right now. If your target segment is much higher than 30% of the US, your product price point is much lower than $9 or $10, and your legacy television CPM, going back to the dark ages, is $3, this doesn't make sense. It makes more sense to buy the waste, avoid the premiums. The way that starts to make sense for those type of advertisers, it is more of an experimental process to tie it back to sales and refine the mix. But it is definitely not right for everyone. The advertisers that this makes the most sense for are the higher value products with smaller segments that really want to tie it back to sales.
Give some specific examples.
Okay. We work with several automotive companies, and we can actually determine households in the market to buy specific vehicles based on when their lease is up. We send the ads only to those households. We pay only for the impressions of the households, and we tell that advertiser a complete return on ad spend. Here's how much you spent on advertising. Here's how many cars you sold, end of story. You see what the look on a CMO's face is?
Other categories?
Automotive is a big category. Packaged goods, even though packaged goods have smaller products, we can target based on purchase intent. Telecommunications, based on targeting previous carriers.
Okay.
Credit cards, you're a non-MasterCard card holder and you make over $300,000 a year and your credit score is 720. The targeting criteria, it's endless. It's finding the balance of that precise segment at the right economic with the right form of measure.
Okay, Scott?
The higher the net present value of the transaction between the consumer and the brand, and the lower in the marketing funnel the campaign objective, the more sense it makes to use addressability, if that makes sense. So those are the two factors I find. And Mike said the third, which is your historical cost. If everything costs $1, you basically get almost free television. Who cares about targeting?
We have advertisers where national cable is $3.25. You can buy a lot of waste with that.
Okay, Jeremy?
I guess I differ slightly in that I think, we're only talking about broadcast, and I think it's as much or more about media mix and what your objective is. If we're trying to get someone to watch a show, we may do broad reach as it relates to things that we do on television, but then target things specifically digitally and then try and figure out what the conversion is back to that show. So I think my personal opinion is we're probably past the days of only thinking about broadcast as it relates to whether you're doing, marketing campaigns or you're doing advertising campaigns. It's going to be cross-platform, and the magic is going to be in developing the algorithms that tell you how much media to put on each platform in order to achieve your objective.
Okay. How much time we got? 2 minutes? I've got 2 more questions. I'm going to. But you will. God, you're going to be.
This is your show.
You're going to be the CEO of WPP one day. Economics of addressability. Some people argue that as TV targeting becomes more refined and waste is eliminated, overall spending will actually be reduced, will go down. Is this a reasonable assumption, or will CPM simply go up to account for the increase in ROI, thus maintaining revenue growth? As the targeting of ads becomes much more precise, the relevancy of those ads will need to follow suit, rendering the need for multiple creative executions. Is customized creative economically feasible for advertisers with multiple target segments? So let's start here.
There's a lot to unpack in that question. I'll take that last point, because
Right.
I think
Yeah, okay.
Michael was dying to jump in on the other.
Right.
The customized creative piece, I think that's a great aspiration, but that one seems like a stretch. That seems like an expensive proposition. When you're buying, depending on what you're attempting to do, if you're trying to get at multiple creatives that are sort of a 30-second spot that you see on TV, that's a very expensive proposition for an advertiser. So I have a hard time imagining that in the near future. I think that's a little bit down the line. Now, you've got the experience with it. I'd love to hear what
I'll take the economic piece. So assuming addressability is strategically placed in the appropriate area within the funnel, meaning 20% of the advertising is going to the core target audience, the first thing you do is you do the math. How much are you really paying to reach that core segment when you factor out the waste? So when you do that, targeting addressably, yes, the advertiser might pay a CPM 2-3 times what they're paying nationally, but that's still 10 times less than what they're actually paying when you factor in
So
the waste.
spending will go down.
So spending will go down for certain advertisers, CPMs will increase, spending will increase for many advertisers because A, they will see that this stuff is actually selling products because of the refined targeting, and most importantly, it's going to bring in new advertisers that have never been in television. 15% of the advertisers that we represent have never been in television before because they couldn't
Like
afford it.
which categories?
So
Is this the
smaller-
long tail, or is this?
No, these are clients that have anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million to spend on all of advertising every year. That would get them 2 units in national television, but it can get them 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks of a target audience.
Or Platinum American Express is another example. In other words, it's a very small audience they're going after, so it's a lot of waste on that. My thought is the following. Number one, the first thing and the easiest thing to save money is to cut marketing in a recession. So if we're in a recessionary period and addressability
Hadn't
comes...
noticed anybody doing that. actually.
I thought so. I think a lot of people might bank it in the short-term mindset of the financial markets. It's just my comment. The second comment is the financial markets suggest that if your economic return is greater than your hurdle rate, you would put more money in. So if addressability is better, one could argue it would rise on that. And then I think the third question was creative. The average television creative is about $500,000. So if you're trying, in production costs and things like that, if I understand correctly, if you're trying to say, I need a different television creative at $500,000, that's a problem. If you're just replacing the flight that says, hi, the cost to go to Boston versus the cost to go to Chicago, I think it would be very easy to do different creative changes. So it depends on the level of
And with
creative
the growth
need.
of online, it might be cheaper, actually.
But for
Correct. And I was referring more to this, once
Yes.
again, the broadcast
Yeah.
television world.
Yeah.
But obviously in the online world,
Yeah.
it's a lot better
cheaper.
and cheaper to go
Yeah.
create
But for it
content.
to work in the national broadcast world, which is what we're talking about today, which the term for national addressable advertising is SASO, single advertiser addressable operation, that means one advertiser buys a schedule and copy splits the messaging to the appropriate audience. If we're talking $500,000 a spot, the economics will never work out.
Jeremy.
I probably differ a little bit with them on this in that I think it really depends greatly on what type of advertiser you're talking about, right? If you're a movie studio, they do this today. They'll create 5, 10, 15 different versions of a trailer and then target those based on different audience segments to figure out what the return on that would be. If you're but you're essentially dealing with a piece of media that's already been created and then re-editing it.
Doesn't cost $500,000.
Doesn't cost. What a lot of agencies are doing now, programmers are doing, is they're setting up digital studios to be able to create different types of creative much more cheaply, and then as broadcast systems in particular are able to do real-time changes as it relates to spots, which is coming very, very soon. We'll have those capabilities this year, it's 2016. You can switch out different forms of creative based on a particular campaign under one flight.
And if Erwin Gottlieb was here, he got some really interesting thoughts on, you mentioned the movie industry, their advertising to sales ratios are so high that, if you can eliminate any waste,
It's enormously effective.
a massive improvement to the bottom line. Anything more?
No, I was just
okay,
agreeing
fine.
with that.
Okay, last question, boss. Measurement in an addressable world. Lastly, so we'll start with you on from the Nielsen point of view. The granularity of data needed for addressable is very different to current demo targeting. Are the current measurement capabilities up to the task? As TV becomes more precise in targeting, will metrics shift? to become more performance-based, for instance, measuring intent to buy or actual offline sales rather than simply impression?
Yeah, so I think you're already starting to see some shift, right?
Yeah.
In what is used to buy and sell and the notion of an ROI-based type of a transaction. I think there are certainly many of our broadcast clients, probably most notably CBS, who've gone down this path and said, look, we're willing to make guarantees of return because we feel that strongly about the quality of our audience and advertising on our air. I do think that there's sort of a logical constraint to that. At some point, I think the broadcasters and the other content owners are going to say at some point, I can only control so much. I can get people to show up and I can control the quality of my programming, but I can't control the quality of the ad. I can't control the quality of the product that's being advertised. I can't control the in-store experience and all those different things. So there's probably a limit as to how much of that can happen, but certainly, and in certain verticals, there's a great opportunity to tie the exposure to the purchase, and so I think
Right.
we'll be seeing more of that.
Okay, Michael?
With respect to the issues discussed before related to scale, nationalization, and inventory, in today's addressable world, absolutely the measurement's there. I mean, we work with television networks where we use set-top box data to determine the households that have watched the previous season of the show, like shows, send the commercials there, then tell them how many people tuned into the show. That's as accountable as it gets. So the measurement is there for where we are today. Will it need to evolve once we address the issues we talked about a few minutes ago? Absolutely. But for today, it's there.
But the providers are going to be very different, the providers of that data.
So the source of the data will likely remain the same. The independent organizations that collect, aggregate, and report back the data on a third-party basis, yes, they will definitely be different.
Scott?
We can measure a ton now. 30 years ago, we couldn't measure as much as we can today. And what we found is if you can measure it, people will hold you accountable. So I definitely think we're headed toward outcome-based accountability, which means at the highest level, can you show me that you generated unaided and aided recall, and definitively all the way down to did you generate the actual return on invested capital for the sale that I expected? And I think we're only a few years away from that to be in a mass basis personally.
Okay. Last but not least, John.
I think, Michael and I disagree a little bit on this. I mean, because he's continuing to refer to local avails, right? And there's a lot more inventory that's purchased on a national basis as it relates than versus a local avail basis. And so I don't think that all the measurement capabilities are there as it relates to what is going on nationally. Most of the media is being purchased on a panel basis of 20,000 or so people, and you then have to extrapolate from that. I agree with the prior panel that I don't think you're going to have a deterministic model for everything. I mean, you're still going to have,
So what's the solution?
Well, I think one of the big parts of the solution are the CE manufacturers and the television manufacturers themselves. Because you've got issues as it relates to the MVPDs and how much data they're going to share out of their set-top boxes with the industry. They might share it with Party A or Party B or Party C, but they're not collectively working across the board as it relates to leverage what that data is and then bring it to the marketplace in a way where you can buy or measure on that basis, right? And this has been going on for a long time. This is not a new issue. There are other ways to measure what's on a television set, right? And those technologies are beginning to come to fruition today, right? You see some of the things that Vizio is doing and other companies that are out there. That is now becoming a real thing. Is it all the way there? No, but I think that and this is a Nielsen thing, but Nielsen needs to do it, the cable operators need to do it, or the CE manufacturers need to do it, but one of the three of them need to really push it forward.
But at some point, one of those CE manufacturers will have to understand what advertising is, and they don't. They're product people. They're a long way away from providing that solution. At least the MVPDs, they understand what advertising is, and they're cooperative in working with us. To your point, it's still the local avails, but that is where we are with addressable television today, the local avail.
The only one challenge is that I don't buy a lot off my television today. It's not my retail channel. So even if I had all that granularity, it would be hard to measure the effective return on investment.
Will it be that?
I believe there's a huge opportunity, but I did work for Procter & Gamble in full disclosure, so I've been tracking this for multiple decades. And I think that if you know this, What's that? I'm that old, exactly. Michael is being very kind to me. I think the challenge, as we all know, is that consumer behavior is shifting and they're going less and less, and the rise of companies like Amazon are making it so that the retail space could become the television ad.
Okay, so the final question is, when we played a game last night with Pete Chernin, long and short. So I'm going to ask you the same question for you, four of you, and you have to answer whether you're long, either you buy or you're short. We're not going to have any holds, right? So is broadcasting really addressable? Long, Jeremy?
Long as in it is, or
You buy it heavily. I mean, you're a believer.
oh yeah, I am today based on the set of capabilities that exist, but I think it can improve.
Okay, Scott.
Short is a percentage of total time available for ads.
Okay.
I buy it 100%.
Well, your livelihood depends upon it. So I would
Certainly does.
I would have not expected a different answer. Anyway.
Same answer as Scott. I'm short on it for the total inventory.
Okay. Well, look, a big thank you to our panel. Sorry that we didn't. The demands of our business prevented us from having a little warm-up session before, so apologies for that. But a big thank you for the four of you, and I hope we kept you awake. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing it.